Welcome back to the Xamarin Forms tutorial where we work on a time tracker app. I'm Patrick and this is the Let's Create series. Before we get into today's episode, I wanted to let you know about a new Facebook group. It's called Microsoft.NET MAUI and it's a group for Xamarin Forms and .NET MAUI developers. It's a new group by one of the viewers and I encourage you to check it out. I'll leave a link in the description below. In episode 25 of the Xamarin Forms tutorial time tracker app, we're going to work on the UI redesign. And in today's episode, we're going to focus on the preparations, and that's going to include adding image assets, which we'll get from an online resource. We're also going to add custom font to the shared project, and we can use that custom font in both platform projects. We're also going to add Skia Sharp to our project so that we can make gradient views, and we'll also discuss the Xamarin Forms experimental features like shaders and gradients, but we're not going to use those, and I'll explain why in the video. Today we'll start implementing the following designs into our app, and so we'll take that basic app layout that we've done and we'll migrate over to these new designs that I've created in Adobe XD. If you want to grab this Adobe XD file, you can. If you head over to the GitHub, if you've forked it or if you're following along, the GitHub Let's Create series time tracker tutorial. One of the branches is UI Redesign time clock page, and if you head over to that branch, you'll see that this XD file, this Adobe XD file is here, and you can pull in this branch and you can grab that redesign file from here. So now that we've finished the Firebase Cloud Firestore implementation, we can close out the base repositories and head back over to the time clock page model. And we can go ahead and get rid of all that test code if you haven't already. So it's basically most of the stuff in the initialize async that we were using to test out our implementation on each platform. So we'll delete that and we'll clean that up a little bit and we can save. And then we'll take a look at our design. So I'll make it bigger and I will zoom in a little. And we're going to change our time clock page to just have the timer that ticks up as you're clocked in. It'll let you know what time you clocked in, and then it'll give you the opportunity to clock out. We're going to add a new page that'll contain just about everything that's in the current time clock page. Maybe this one will be called recent activity or recent work. And then we're going to give that a UI overhaul and redesign so that we have some nice gradients in there. The clock in button is a little more of the focal point. And then we can put some of the recent work in a frame beneath it, and that'll include mainly today's work, but if there's not enough items, we can show maybe like the last 4 items. View all will go to the tab, which we're going to get rid of the tabs, but it'll go to the tab that we basically called summary. So it'll go to this, and we're going to redesign that. We have this profile information up here, and tapping that will lead to the profile page. I have a spot for settings, but I don't really have anything meaningful enough to deserve its own page. So right now, the settings page is sort of tentative. So this icon will actually not be in our first implementation because most of the things that we're going to do in settings, we can actually do in profile because they're pretty specific to profile anyway, like changing your password or updating your profile picture, maybe updating your title and hourly rate. This would normally be something that like a manager would take care of, but just for our little side project, we'll go ahead and include it in the app itself. And so this is where the user will be able to update that information. And then on the summary page, once you tap one of these statements, which these are just copies of the views I made up here, but they're going to be specific statements and their details. So instead of 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., it'll be the date range. It'll tell you how many hours you completed, and then the dollar amount that you earned. And then tapping that will give you the hourly work breakdown that's in that statement. We also have this updated login page, and so we don't really need those 2 login items. We can kind of mask that with our own design. So we can default to this email and password login. When the user clicks login, it'll go through Firebase auth email, and it'll log in just like we've been doing. Otherwise, we're going to give the user the opportunity to use a phone number, and this will use the Firebase auth login by phone feature that we implemented earlier in the series, and that'll go to just another page where they can put in their phone number And then another field will show where they can put in that one-time passcode. The first thing we'll want to do is head over to Google Fonts, and we're going to need to find a font that we can use that's not the standard font. And so looking through it, there was one that I really liked. I found this Nunito font, and I really like the way it looks. The light is nice, and then going into like a regular size, something like 400 looks okay, and then the bold also looks pretty nice to me. So I'm going to go ahead and download this family. So I'm downloading the Nunito family. The other thing we need to do is find some commercial-free assets. Not that this is going to be an app for money, but it's always best to just use commercial-free assets. So we need to find commercial-free assets. One resource I really like to use for assets is Flaticon. And so if you go to Flaticon, make sure you create an account so that you can add things to your collection, and then you can later provide the proper attributions to the creators of these assets. So the first asset we're going to need is like a back arrow. So we can just type in arrow in the search bar. Then we can find one that we like that looks like a back arrow, which I've already added to my collection. So I have here. And so once you click it, make sure you click add to collection. So I already have mine added. And the next thing we want to do is make this a white icon. So you can do that by selecting edit icon, and then we'll change it to white. And then we can download the PNG version, and this doesn't need to be huge. We could just make it 64 pixels. The next icon we need is like this clock or something like that. Just kind of indicates that it's the time tracker app. So I'm going to search for clock. Once you find one that you like, go ahead and add it to collection. And then the same thing, we're going to change the color to white, and we can download. And this one needs to be a little bigger. So let's do something like 128 or 256. I'll just do 128, and we'll save that as well. The next icon we need is this little profile icon, and that's for like the default user photo. So let's go ahead and search for profile. And again, once you find one you like, go ahead and add it to your collection, and then you can download it as well. Okay, so we've got our icons. The next thing we need to do is import them into our project. So in the Android project, we can head over to resources, and then we should have a drawable folder. If we don't, you can go ahead and create one. And then in that drawable folder, we'll right click, add existing item or existing files. And then we'll look for those files that we just downloaded from Flaticon, and we're going to add them here. Okay, and so I have my 3 files, the back arrow, the clock, and the user profile image. And so I'm going to minimize the Android project, and we're going to go into resources on the iOS side. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to right click, add existing files, and we're going to add those same 3 files. The last thing we're going to want to do is bring in those fonts. And so let's go ahead and make a folder in the shared project, and we'll just call this folder fonts. So once you've unzipped your font, you can right click fonts and click add and existing items or existing files. We're going to add everything in that folder, including the license. And then I'll click copy the files into the directory. Now it's going to add all of those fonts. So the license remains there, but the rest of these fonts need to have a specific build action. So we'll highlight all of them. We'll right click. We'll change build action to embedded resource. And then we'll click a random one and just make sure it has that embedded resource so that we can kind of confirm that they all do. And so that's great. In order to use these fonts, we need to update Xamarin Forms. Otherwise, we need the fonts to be placed in the project level, and we don't want to do that. So let's go ahead and check our dependencies and make sure Xamarin Forms is updated. And it's not. It's at 440. So let's go ahead and update all of these. We'll update Xamarin Essentials and Xamarin Forms in each of the projects. So once you've updated Xamarin Forms and Xamarin Essentials in each of the projects, the shared and Android and iOS, and you've added your fonts to the fonts folder and you've set the build action on each of the fonts, we can head over to assembly info and we can use a new attribute, export font. And so we'll say assembly export font and use a quick fix for using Xamarin Forms. And then in here we need to declare the font name. And so we need to do this for each of the fonts. So the more you add, the more attributes you'll need. And so I'm just going to start at the top and I'll work my way through the bottom. And notice here I'm using the exact name with the file extension. And so now I'll do the same for the remaining fonts. Okay, and so now I have an attribute set for each font file name. So there should be about 14 and I have 14 here, so that's perfect. So once you've got that done, you can save and close assembly info, and now we should be able to just use those fonts. So let's head over to the login page, and we'll take a look at the design. So we see we need a gradient background, and there's two ways really. There's probably many more, but the two ways we'll discuss are Skia Sharp and the experimental features of Xamarin Forms. While I'm very excited about these experimental features, I don't really like putting experimental features in production applications, and so we're going to go the Skia Sharp route, and then once those experimental features like the brushes and shaders come out into a full release, then we'll consider migrating this over. But for now, let's go ahead and add Skia Sharp. So we'll right-click dependencies and manage NuGet packages, and we'll search for Skia Sharp. This is in the shared project, and we want skiasharp.views.forms, and we'll go ahead and click Add Package. Now that we have Skia Sharp.views.forms added, we can make this gradient box view. So let's go into our Views folder, and let's add a folder here, and we'll call it SK Views. In SK Views, we'll add another folder, and this will be base, and these are going to be basically the base files that all other SK Views are going to share. So in base, we can add a new file, and this will be SK View Base. SK View Base is going to be an abstract class, and it's going to extend from content view. So we can use a quick fix to import the using for Xamarin Forms. And then in the constructor, we need to make that canvas. So we'll say var canvas equals new sk canvas view. And we can import the using for skiasharp.views.forms. We need to subscribe to the paint surface event. So we can say canvas.paintSurface plus equals, and just press tab is fine. And that'll make a private method for when the canvas updates. And then finally, we need to set the content of this view to canvas. So that's all we'll do here. The very next thing we need to do is implement this paint surface. So on canvas paint surface, we need to grab that SK image info from the SK paint surface event args. So we can do that by saying SK image info, and this is going to give us things like the width and height and all that. And so we can use a quick fix to just import the using for Skia Sharp. And then we can say info, and this will be e.info. The next thing we need is the canvas, so we can say sk canvas, and we can just call it canvas is fine, equals, and this will be e.surface.canvas, and this will give us that reference to the canvas. And now we want to clear the canvas. Every time we go to paint surface or refresh a canvas, let's go ahead and clear it. So we'll say canvas.clear, and then we can create a paint. So we'll say using, and we can say var paint equals new sk paint, and then in here, and so in here we want to call any of the children views like a draw method or a paint method. So let's just say on paint surface. And then things we need to provide to the children are info, so they can get some image info. They'll need a reference to maybe the canvas and definitely the paint. And now we need to make a protected abstract method, so we can go above our canvas paint surface. So we can say protected abstract void on paint surface, and it's going to take in these parameters. So we can say sk image info, and we can call this info is fine. The next one is sk canvas, and we can call it canvas. And the last one is an SK paint, and so we can call it paint. And now anybody who implements this base class will have to override and implement an on-paint surface method, and then that will be called here in the base class. And so now we don't have to keep repeating all of this or anything in the constructor. So that'll take care of our SK view base. The next base class we need, so we can click SK views base add, and this will be a new class, and this will be a gradient view base. So we can say gradient view base. This is also going to be an abstract class, and gradient view base is going to inherit from SK view base. And so all gradient views are going to do pretty much the same thing. So we need a couple bindable properties. And so we can start with the start and end color. So we can say public static read only bindable property. We can use a quick fix to import the using for Xamarin Forms. Then we can call this start color property. And we can set this equal to bindable property.create. And then we can use name of, which is going to be the name of a variable or a property here that we don't actually have yet, but we'll create in a second. And so this will be start color. The type of this color is going to be color, Xamarin Forms color. The declaring type is the class, so gradient view base. And the default color, we can just use something like color.white. And so if you don't set the start or end color, then it'll just be a white background. And so that's fine. So we need to do the same thing for the end color. So read only bindable property again, and this will be end color property. And that'll equal bindable property.create. And very similar, we'll do name of end color. And it'll be a type of color for the type. And the declaring type is, again, the class, so gradient view base. And then a default value will be white again. And now we can make these actual class level properties. And so the properties are going to be public color, start color. And forget, we'll just cast the value to color, and we'll get value from the property. So we'll use get value and start color property. The setter, just a bit easier, we will call set value, and we'll do start color property and value. So now we'll do the same thing for end color. With these bindable properties created, we can go under the constructor, and now we can override that onPaint surface method. And instead of throwing a new not implemented exception, let's go ahead and delete that. And now let's do what every gradient will need to do when they go to paint the surface. So every gradient uses the paint shader. So to set the shader, we can say paint.shader equals skShader dot, and then we'll create a linear gradient. So as we can see, the create linear gradient method needs an SK point for start. So we can say new SK point. And this will be the very top center to the very bottom center. So start to end. And so the start will be info.width divided by 2, and that'll get us the center X. The Y will be 0. And we can just say this is the start point. And then in here we can say top, middle. Okay, and then our next point is the end point, and this will be info.width divided by 2 again. But instead of 0, which is the top, we're going to do info.height, which is the bottom. So we can say info.height. And we'll say this is the end point and bottom middle. Next, we need the colors, and so this will be something like start and end colors, right? So new, and this will be an SK color array, and in this array, we can use start color. And then we have this really neat method to SK color, and that just comes from skiasharp.views.forms. So use a quick fix to bring that in, and now we have to SK color, and we can do the same for end color. Okay, the next thing we need is the order of these colors. So basically like which ones start, which ones end. And so we can just provide a new float array here. And we can just use 0 and 1. So the very first one will be the start color, and the second or last one will be the end color, and so that's fine. And now it wants some kind of a shader tile mode. And so we can just use the SK shader tile mode dot repeat is fine. So that'll take care of that. So now we'll call a method that the children will implement. They'll be forced to implement because we'll make it abstract. And so we can do something like draw gradient. And we need to pass in the info, canvas, and paint as well. And so we can pass in info, canvas, and paint. And then we can use a quick fix to generate this method. But we don't want the method to be private. We want it to be protected. We also want the method to be abstract. And so with all abstract methods, we can remove the implementation. And now with all that done, we're ready to create the first child that we'll use in the UI. And so if we look at the design, we notice that we have these gradients. And so most of them are box gradients minus these circle gradients. And so we'll make our first rectangle gradient child. And so we can do that by right-clicking the SK Views folder, add a new class. And this will be a rectangular gradient view. So we'll just say rect gradient view. This rect gradient view is not going to be abstract because we're going to actually use it, but it will inherit from base.gradientViewBase. And so now it'll want us to implement the abstract class. So you can do a quick fix, implement abstract class, and it wants us to implement this draw gradient. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So in here, all we need to do is the actual drawing. So we can say canvas.drawRect. And this is going to take in a rect. So we can either make an SKRect or we can use the other method signature, which is just an X, Y, width, and height. And that's one we'll do. So X will be 0. Y is also 0. Width comes from info. So it'll be info.width. Height also comes from our image info. So this will be info.height. And then we need a paint. Well, the base class already implements the paint, so nothing new to do here. We'll just pass in paint, and that's all we'll do here. The benefit of all that pre-work is now we can make the circular gradient view as well, and all we have to do is change just this one line to draw a circle instead of a rectangle. But we'll save that part for when we need it. For now, what we should do is check this to make sure it works and see the fruits of our labor. So we'll go over to the login page, which we already have open. We need to bring in that skviews namespace. We'll say XML NS, and we'll just say skviews is fine. And now skviews is going to be basically the path to skviews. And so if you just type skviews, you should get basically a pretty good recommendation for what we should import. And so to put this in the background of our content, we actually need something that can layer views. And so a grid is a good means to do that. And then we'll cut this stack layout and we'll paste it inside the grid. And then above that stack layout is where we'll put our huge gradient rectangle. So in here, we can just do skviews, rect gradient view. The start color and the end color we are going to add, but we should add them as reusable colors so that if we decide to change them later, we can change them in one place instead of changing them everywhere. So to do that, we'll head over to app.xaml, and we already have a couple colors that we were using in the previous implementation, but let's go ahead and use the colors that we have here. So the first color we have is 00BFFF, so I'll copy that, and we'll make a color here. And so this will be color X key can be gradient start color. In here, we'll actually define the color, and so that'll be that 00BFFF. The next color we'll need is the gradient end color. So gradient end color. And so that'll be at the other end of this gradient spectrum, and that'll be 086A87. So I'll copy that and paste it in here. And then here's a pretty good place to pause the video so that you can grab these colors, and then we'll move on. So we have gradient start and end color. So we can head back over to our login page and we can provide these to the gradient view. So we have start color will be static resource, and this will be gradient start. And then we have end color, which will be static resource again, and this will be gradient end color. So now we have our start and end color. This view should take up the entire height and width, but just in case, let's go ahead and set the vertical options to fill and expand. This stack layout isn't going to look like our designs, but just to make sure our gradient is working, let's go ahead and run the app. And with our app running, we can see that we do have a gradient background. One thing we'll notice is that we have this navigation bar above still, so we can get rid of that by going up to the attributes of the content page and saying navigation page dot has navigation bar and set it to false. And when we save, we should see a hot reload. Get rid of that. The last thing we'll notice is that the status bar is the incorrect color. So we can head back over to app.xaml and we can copy our start color. And we'll go to the Android project and go to resources, go into values and styles. And we'll see that this color primary dark is used for the status bar. So let's go ahead and change that to our light color. And so that way they'll kind of connect and you won't see the difference really. So we have to restart the app. And then with our app running, we'll see that from the very top of the status bar all the way down, we have this really nice gradient. And so that's perfect. I think that's a good stopping point for today's video. If you like the video, feel free to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments section. Thank you for watching the Xamarin Forms tutorial. I'm Patrick, and this is the Let's Create series.